Hello, Ismael. How are you, sir?
Good morning, Aftab. Good to see you. I'm
It's
great.
it,
How are
it,
you
it,
doing?
it's thank you for taking time out of your really busy schedule to give us this opportunity today. I really appreciate it. I should formally introduce you before we start. So you're the senior director for economics and investment strategy at the PIF. Did I get that right?
We prefer to call it the PIF, but yes, that's correct.
And for those that don't know, the PIF is the Saudi Arabian Sovereign Wealth Management Fund. It has, in my understanding, is it has nearly $1 trillion under management. And for the region I'm sitting in, it's significant because you guys own Newcastle United Football Club, which I follow. So I'm really glad to
They've
be
been very
talking to you.
successful recently, right? So you must be happy with that.
They won the FA Cup just recently, I
Mm,
believe. And I think that's the first trophy in many years.
mm.
The start of many, I think, I hope. You were also the lead economist for the GCC region for the World Bank. Is that right? Have I got that right as well?
Yes, that's right. So I had a long career with the World Bank, and that was my last position with the bank a couple of years ago. Yeah.
Amazing, amazing. So thank you for coming on. Let's kick on straight away if you're happy to do so. I think the kind of guys who listen to me will be really keen to understand where you're from. Where did you grow up, and expand on just your family, please.
Okay, sure. So I was born in Cairo in the 60s, so I'm giving my age away a little bit. And
You don't look it.
yeah, that's
You're
what
doing
people
something
say.
right.
Thank you. But yeah, so I grew up mostly in the UK. So I was sent to boarding school in the UK, and then from there I went to the States for graduate school and joined the World Bank and lived in many different countries in the last 25 years. So I lived in Sri Lanka, in Nigeria, Washington, obviously. Then I moved to Romania, and from Romania to Kuwait, from Kuwait to Saudi, where I am now. So, I've had an experience in many different continents, in rich countries, poor countries, and everything in between. I have two boys, and one about to turn 22 next month, and 19, and they're both engineers studying in the US. And I sent them to the same high school that I went to, so they've all
Amazing.
been through the boarding school experience in the UK. So that's a little bit about my background.
What type of engineers are they? What's their
One
specialism?
is industrial engineering, and the
Okay.
other one says he's a real engineer. He's an
Really?
electrical engineer. So yeah, but
Amazing.
yeah.
I have a son who's 22 as well, and he's a chemical
Hmm.
engineer. So he's
Hmm.
about to start his first job here in the UK.
No, great.
Amazing, right? Kicking off. Is it also true that you've actually visited Bradford before?
Yes.
Yeah. Please tell me where, when, how did
Oh
that come
gosh,
about?
it was. I think it was in the 1980s, and my aunt had. My aunt's a professor, still in her 80s, still a professor at Alexandria University, still teaching, and she's in pharmaceuticals, pharmacology, that kind of stuff. And she was doing a summer program at Bradford
Okay.
University. So
Ah.
at the time I was still in school, went up to Bradford, spent a long weekend with my aunt, uncle, and my cousins up there. Yeah,
Well, you must come back, to see
it's
me,
probably time
and
time to have a return journey. Yeah.
you're most welcome anytime. So let's focus just a little bit on your previous role with the World Bank. I mean, they've got a varied reputation, especially now with some of the comments that have been coming out of Africa recently. Tell me, what was your biggest achievement in that role?
Well, that's interesting question. After I think plenty of different achievements in different countries in different ways. So maybe I can just pick up. You mentioned Africa, so let me pick up on my
Please.
experience in Nigeria. So in Nigeria, I was the lead finance and private sector specialist, and I built a small team of 7 or 8 people together, and we were focusing on it was at the time of the financial crisis. So we were focusing on stabilizing financial institutions and also job creation. And a lot of jobs, as you know, are created by small businesses. And the idea was, how could we get finance to small businesses, so small and medium enterprises, SMEs, how could we do microfinance in a sustainable and profitable way? And so we created all of these microfinance banks, and we had our private sector arm, the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, come in and invest some of those banks and help to put in the kind of systems that would, address things like credit risk and recoveries and push it out to the rural areas. So we also had another project, kind of a sister project, that pushed certain sectors of the economy that we thought had a lot of potential. One was Nollywood. I don't know if you know about the film and music industry.
Right?
Sorry?
It's the film industry, right?
Yes.
Nollywood.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure you know Bollywood, right? So Hollywood, Bollywood, Nollywood is the number 3.
Right. Okay.
But it's very prominent in Africa, and Nigeria is the lead. So the Nigerian movies are watched all over the place. They're even dubbed into French and watched in francophone countries, because there's very little produced African stories for an African audience.
Right.
And the music is incredible. It's not known really in the West. There have been 1 or 2 crossovers. I think Snoop Dogg did 1 or 2, you know,
I never
collaborations
thought I
with
would be
Nigerian
discussing
artists.
Snoop Dogg with you, Ismail. Okay. Okay. Oh wow! So it sounds like you're doing really well. It sounds like that. The experience in Nigeria was all about building infrastructure and putting systems in place. It sounds positive. Why is there this negative stereotype around the World Bank? Then explain that to me.
Yeah, so a couple of things probably. One is a little bit of misunderstanding of what the World Bank does. And the other one is a better understanding and actually a different approach, philosophical approach. So the first thing I will say is that all of our loans to African countries have no interest. So, and they're usually paid back over 25, 30-year period. So you can imagine if you borrowed a dollar or a pound 30 years ago, what it was worth then, and you repay it now, your 85% of that loan is really a grant. We're giving the money away. We don't make money on those loans. In fact, we lose money. And the way we can stay in business is that we make loans to richer countries, say European countries. I worked in Romania for many years. We were making loans to Romania, to Poland, to Croatia, richer countries. And they were paying market rates, and we were making a profit on those loans. And that profit was used to subsidize interest-free loans to poor countries in Africa, South Asia, and other places. So that's the first thing to keep in mind, right? So the World Bank is part of the UN system, and it is a development institution. It's not really a bank. It's not there to make money. Then the second thing to say is that in the past we did make a lot of mistakes. I think that's fair to say, and I think there is a consensus now that some of the policies that we followed in the past, the kind of shock therapy policies, were probably not the right ones. So in the 1970s and 80s, a lot of developing countries got themselves into trouble by borrowing a lot of money and not necessarily investing it in the most productive manner. So we had a lot of white elephants. There was quite a lot of corruption. Money was siphoned off, given to elites. And the World Bank didn't really pay enough attention to some of those issues. The other thing was that developing countries would very much overvalue their exchange rates because they wanted to get imports into the country, again, for the benefit of the elites mostly. And that destroyed local industries. They were uncompetitive in many ways.
Right.
And the bank came in and said, okay, so you're spending too much money, you've got a big deficit, you need to stop spending, you've got an overvalued exchange rate, you need to float your exchange rate. But then we didn't really focus on the supply side. So just because you're more competitive doesn't mean that businesses are going to just grow up overnight. If you cut spending, people are going to suffer. Healthcare, education, these kind of things need financing. And if you ask the government to slash their budgets overnight, what are they going to do? I mean, they're going to cut spending on health and education, and poor people are going to suffer because of that. So this kind of understanding that maybe some of the things that we did were a little bit too much, too far in the right direction, but probably not the right speed. So, certainly 20 years ago when we used to have the annual meetings or spring meetings of the World Bank, we had a lot of demonstrators on the sidewalks, down with the World Bank and this kind of stuff.
Yes.
And they used to bundle us in with the IMF as well, which is another story. But I think nowadays we're seeing, less and less of that. I think the bank has moved to a certain extent. And I think we've communicated a little bit better than in the past, and I think that's helped.
So it's the soft PR management that was not as good. The fundamentals were fairly solid. How do you think the Chinese are doing it differently now to the model you described? What's
Okay,
the key
this
difference there?
is yeah, super interesting question. So, China is obviously one of the World Bank's shareholders,
Yes.
and has been involved and one of the biggest borrowers as well. So the Chinese model is fantastically successful. You have to say that. So they've come from being a very poor country to being one of the superpowers of the world now, and I think it's all based around a couple of things. One is to get a handle on the demographics. So if you have massive population growth, you struggle just to catch up in terms of building the infrastructure, schools, hospitals for all these people. So the Chinese tackled that first. The second one is actually the infrastructure side. So they've been fabulously successful in investing money. So they have a very high savings rate, and they put that into roads, bridges, rail, ports, etc., and built out the trade links to other countries as well. So everybody knows China has become the workshop of the world, and now they are moving again to support their client countries, and they've put in place the Asian Infrastructure Development Bank. So the One Belt and Road Initiative to build out their trade links and to support the countries that they're trading with to build out their own infrastructure. So especially in Asia, in other Asian countries, in Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, these places, but also increasingly in Africa. So they want to have trade with African countries. They want to have oil, minerals, etc. And that means they need to build the roads and railways and all the port linkages, etc., to allow them to do that efficiently. And I think that model has been very successful. China has its own critics, of course. If you look at a place like Sri Lanka, where I was based for many years, you can see some of the Chinese loans there that built the port infrastructure, indebted the country. They weren't able to repay the loans, and then the Chinese said, "Okay, we'll do a debt equity swap. We'll take the port instead of you paying back, and we'll manage it." So some people say that was the model all along, but that's where the critics of China come in.
They're very much the super trend, aren't they, at the moment, China? Everybody talks about how they've lifted hundreds and hundreds of millions of their citizens out of poverty and become the economic superpower that you described, but all without firing a gun or conquest. Do you think that's the model that the West will start to follow, or do you see
Well,
us carrying on
I
in
certainly
on the same
hope.
path?
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, Aftab, because a lot of people say China is a threat or a military threat, but the People's Army hasn't fought a war since 1973. So as you say, without firing guns, and I think that's part of the answer. We have wars raging all around us, certainly in the Middle East, but also in Europe and Africa and elsewhere. And war is the antithesis of development, right? You can
That's right.
destroy in seconds what's taken decades to build. And clearly, if we can manage to find a different way to manage our own conflicts and problems, then everyone is going to be much better off. So I do hope that that focus on, non-proliferation, non-escalation,
Yes.
peaceful means of negotiation will, hopefully that's why the UN was set up. That's why the World Bank was
We
set
all
up.
hope so. We all hope so,
Yeah.
especially with the chaos that's going on in your region at the moment. I
Yes.
really hope they can pull back from that. So in your current role, Ismail, at the PIF, what are the biggest economic headwinds that you think we're facing in the near to medium term?
Well, let me say, Aftab, I don't speak on behalf of the PIF today. I'm
Sorry,
just,
just
it's a
generally,
personal
as a renowned
discussion.
economist, what are the big
But
headwinds that you see? What's
yeah,
the big
I mean,
challenges,
if we let's remove it one step back and talk
please?
about Saudi Arabia. I think the challenge for Saudi Arabia is one that's very well encapsulated in Vision 2030. So this is to manage the energy transition, to move away from dependency on oil and fossil fuels, to create a sustainable economy that's able to create jobs for a very large, young, dynamic population. So 70% of the population is under the age of 35. And this is a generation that's grown up with social media. They see all sorts of things. They see how the rest of the world lives,
That's
etc.
right.
And they have tremendous aspirations in terms of social, economic, etc. And I think that the regime has understood this very well and channeled that energy and started to open up the country in many, many different ways. So Saudi Arabia was almost completely closed until very, very recently. I mean, I think it was 2017 or 2018 that they introduced tourist visas. So before that, you couldn't visit Saudi Arabia unless you had some kind of business uh,
You're
to.
absolutely right. I used to work
Or
there 10 years ago, and it was
yeah.
completely different to what it looks like today. So you're absolutely right. You just touched on the hydrocarbons. I mean,
Mm.
is the environment almost a threat to these energy producers? Is that why the world probably isn't making so much progress? Is there a secret hand holding the environmental agenda back? Is that a fair charge, do you think?
No, I think I would push back strongly on that after. That was
I'm
certainly
just
the
asking
thinking
questions,
maybe
man.
that was certainly the thinking maybe five years ago, 10 years ago. There was very much an anti-environment push from oil producers, but now I think that whole paradigm has changed. So I think the GCC countries realize that they have been fossil fuel superpowers in the past. They can also be renewable energy superpowers in the future. So
Okay.
the potential for renewable energy in a place like Saudi Arabia, which has massive empty land, has hot and sunny all day long. I
Yes,
mean, 40,
I can
50
vouch for that.
degrees all throughout. I mean, they produce the cheapest solar energy in the world. And they haven't really started exploiting it. They are on the right path now. They have a target of 50% renewable energy by 2030, and they're investing huge amounts in green hydrogen in the billions of dollars. And I think they really have jumped onto this bandwagon because there is a very strong business case to do so. It really makes sense for them to create their own renewable energy. It's much cheaper than even the cheapest fossil fuels now. So the more they can use that, the less they will use their own fossil fuels, and the more that they can continue to export their oil and gas overseas. So I think you'll find certainly in Saudi, but also in other countries in the GCC, a strong push towards renewable energy, and no one is really fearing that. At the same time, they have an incentive to see what they can do in terms of new technology to reduce the emissions around, carbon capture and storage. Of course, fossil fuels are not the problem, right? It's the emissions that are
That's
the
right.
problem. So if you can use fossil fuels without emissions, problem solved. And who's going to solve that problem? Only the oil producers. So they're financing quite a lot of R&D in that space as well.
They
So
certainly are. It's almost, well, what you've said basically is that they see the new green agenda as an opportunity as opposed to a threat, which is what a lot of people perceive it to be, but it clearly isn't. Just shifting away a little bit from your region to my region, because the UK is talking about setting up a sovereign wealth fund, and of course, a lot of our fundamentals are different to ones that you've just described. So we actually have a huge growth in the elderly population. Our birth rate is very low. I think we're going to struggle to pay pensions fairly soon and keep our core infrastructure going. What advice would you give to Keir Starmer, who's setting up a sovereign wealth fund? Where should he focus that money? What's the big opportunity in Europe?
okay.
I know that's a very unfair question. I apologize. But you're a very smart man, so I think I'm justified in asking you.
Yeah, well, let me put some ideas out there, Aftab, and
Please.
see if you have others, right? So, I mean, the important thing is there's lots of different sovereign wealth funds. Each of them have different objectives. So, if you look at small countries like Norway and Kuwait, they set up investment funds and they invest money in, public equities around the
Yes.
world. I think famously the Norwegian fund owns 1% of every stock in the world, something like that.
I think the figure is about 9% of the world's equities are owned by the Norwegian fund. It's a crazy number. Is it 9 or 12? I can't recall exactly.
I
But it's
don't
a
think it's
crazy
that
amount.
high, surely. But anyway,
Yeah.
yeah. So they have small populations. If they invest the money, they can basically live off the interest, right? The Saudi fund is different, similar to the Malaysian fund in many ways, focused on development of the economy, of the local economy. And often some countries have two different funds. One is focused on international investments, the other one is focused on the local. So the idea is, first of all, think of the objective. What are we trying to achieve in the UK by setting up a fund? I don't know if you want to answer that question first.
I think the key word that the politicians keep banding about is growth, but growth in where I honestly don't think our politicians know what the priorities are, and I say that without wanting to be rude. I think that's the real question they need to answer, and there also seems to be this huge effort in keeping the old stuff going instead of just focusing on where the new technology is. So we're behind economies such as yours on building data infrastructure, for example, or investing into transport infrastructure, which is where we need to be focusing the money. But instead, we're still talking about, there's chatter about opening up old coal mines again. I think we need to let go of some of the legacy, or the old legacy, and just move into the new world as the world is doing. And maybe there's a question for us to answer about who is leading us. And I do think there's a lot of criticism around how democracy is working in the West at the moment. And it's actually being tabled for discussion now that democracy is something that is actually holding us back because we take so long to make decisions in the West, whereas in regions such as yours, somebody can make a decision quickly and get it enacted pretty much within months.
Yeah, so you've opened up a lot of things there, Aftab. But let me say, okay, so growth, you want to achieve growth, and you're right. So in the UK, has a much more well-developed private sector than in Saudi Arabia. So one of the reasons that PIF has moved into many of these investments is because the public sector traditionally in Saudi Arabia, the private sector traditionally has been kind of moving together with the public sector, just getting contracts from the government, etc. And a real risk-taking entrepreneurship doesn't, and deep capital markets, etc., have not been developed to the same extent as they are in the UK. So the first thing is before the public sector gets involved, you need to identify what is the public sector failure, what is the market failure, why are they getting involved. In a place like the UK, if you get the right incentives in place, the right regulations, the private sector can probably take care of a lot of these things that you're talking about, right? So, moving into renewable energy, moving into AI, moving into data centers. If you have the right regulations for them, you remove the red tape. You don't really need to finance it all from the public sector.
But
One
our
of the things,
spending, private sector spending, investment is at an all-time low. How do you encourage that?
yeah. So, I always say capital goes to where it's best treated.
Okay.
So if you're going to, if you want to attract capital, you have to look at de-risking the investments. You have to look at the taxation regime, tariff regimes, regulatory regimes. You have to make sure that the commercial court system is set up and easy to use. You look at the bankruptcy legislation. You look at all of these different things, right? I think the UK is moving quite strongly towards increased taxation.
Yes.
Yeah, and quite a lot of red tape is kind of being introduced, unfortunately. So that's what the private sector will always say. But I think that's true. It's happening now.
And it's even more riskier when you have the opportunity to move away, and that's what we're finding now. Lots of our millionaires and entrepreneurs are moving. A lot of them are moving to your region. Maybe they've heard about you, Ismail, and you're attracting them. They're all flying over there. Right, let's move away from business completely. Tell me more about what you do when you're not in work. What do you do to relax, to chill out?
Well, I like to play sports. So I love to play all kinds of different sports. But last night I played in a padel tournament, padel tennis. I don't know,
This
that's
seems to be
becoming a
massive
big
padel.
deal.
What is padel? Apparently, we're getting a padel gym in Bradford fairly soon. I have no idea what
Yeah.
padel is. I think it's something that started in Dubai, right?
Well, I think it started in Spain, but it's become
Okay.
very big in the Middle East and certainly in Kuwait, where I lived before, and in Saudi, Dubai, Egypt. It's become very, very big. So it's kind of a mixture between squash and tennis. So you play on a court like a tennis court, but it's much smaller, and it's got glass walls, so the balls bounce off the glass walls, and it's a lot more about skill, less about strength, and
Right.
so you can play into your 60s and 70s. You almost always play doubles, so there's less running around.
Sounds
It's a
perfect for
nice
me. It
social
sounds like a
game.
lazy man squash. It's probably something.
Yes, that's
It's
that's
probably
pretty
something
much what it is.
I might be good at. Maybe they finally invented a sport I can actually partake in. When are you next visiting us, Ismail? When are we having a kebab together?
Yeah. Well, I've seen some of your pictures of beautiful kebabs on LinkedIn, so the sooner the better, I think.
We had a fantastic one yesterday. We were in Manchester. We went to see a Qawwali concert. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept, but it's Pakistani folklore singing. But it preceded a beautiful kebab. I will definitely be posting about it later on LinkedIn to whet your appetite, to get you over here. But it's been a pleasure. Thank you for this, Ismail. It's been an absolute joy to talk to you, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks very much, Aftab. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be with you.
So
Take
we'll
care.
stop it there, and I'll do the editing. I think that was okay. How did you find it?
Great. Sure,
Yeah.
sure. Um, it's
Any feedback for me?
it'll be interesting just to see it.
What
Sometimes
I
you
will
don't
do is
realize.
I will stop the recording now, and then I will send